No, thank you firstly to Heneb for inviting us here this afternoon. Moving on from what Ian Grant mentioned earlier this morning and hinted to, the increased potential for Romano-British archaeology in areas unexpected, and through what Chris was also saying about the potential from Holt and also Basing work for, again, more and more Roman archaeology that we're discovering. Steve and I are here today to talk to you about the discovery of, the Roman villa, labelled as the Rossett Roman villa. Bit of a misnomer. Those of you that are aware, it's actually in Burton Green. We were told that because it's the parish of Rossett, at a technicality, Rossett were able to claim it. But we are happy if Burton Green would like it back. More than happy. So today's talk is going to tell you about how we came to find the Roman villa, but also start thinking about, well, what that implies about the Roman landscape of northeast Wales. So before we started the project, the area was largely dominated, or our understanding of the area was dominated by military sites. We're obviously within the vicinity of the legionary fortress in Caer or Chester, and all the outposts, the forts, the other types of military bases, the military tile works at Holt, the larger lead works and industrial production up at Flint and Oakenholt, all with some oversight, or direct oversight, most likely, from the Legion based in Chester. There's also some later Roman coin hoards known from around the area, but largely our understanding of rural settlement was rather lacking compared to these military sites. There were, however, hints of rural settlement and activity appearing in places like Plascour, so literally just over the road from here, underneath the retail park, where there's a potential villa site, lots of surplus grain being produced, agricultural production, but also possibly some tile or pottery kilns. Boras potentially showing up a Romano-British farmstead, maybe a villa. It would be nice to think there might be one hidden underneath that farmhouse somewhere. But otherwise, our knowledge was very sort of bereft of this understanding of rural activity. However, looking at the Portable Antiquities Scheme data, so the data recorded by people out in their gardens, but also metal detecting in the landscape, recorded through the Portable Antiquities Scheme, suggests that there are a lot more hotspots of Roman activity than the sites that we know about would suggest. And this is just the Roman material from Wrexham itself. So this kind of shows you that there is a lot more out there. People don't just leave all these objects behind. There should be, in theory, people, maybe occupation, activity, rural activity, in amongst all of this, structures, settlements. And this is what we were sort of hoping to look for as this project kind of came into its fruition. So at the start of the project, it was very much the understanding that the sites we knew about had direct or very strong military associations. A lot of the sites that were not forts or the fortress itself were to do with the exploitation of the mineral resources, something that Steve will talk about a bit more in a minute. The dating of them also appeared to date to the Flavian period and later. Many of those were then abandoned around the 120s, 130s. We had no known Roman villas or these kind of high-status rural farmsteads, but those find spots that we were picking up through the Portable Antiquities Scheme data, lots of coins, Roman brooches, suggest that there was a lot more activity in the area than this suggested. So I shall hand you over to Steve.
Seamlessly. Thank you. So now we go to October 2019. Seems like a long time ago now, but time do fly, as they say. We've never really, I don't think, defined a project area such as a line on a map, but It's really, as Caroline has hinted at, the area of the west side of the River Dee, between Chester, which is just off the map to the top of the slide, Wrexham, where we are now, to the south of the slide, the A483 dual carriageway corridor with the railway line next to it. And that's broadly the area that we were interested in looking at. Again, an area where there's been a significant amount of Roman material coming up, being reported through to the Portable Antiquities Scheme, hinting at sites which do exist, but we can't find them. The sites that we're going to be talking about this afternoon are off Cobbler's Lane, which is shown there. This is I suppose, an east-west lane heading towards Hope on the western side of the slide there. And then the site at Stringer's near Stringer's Lane, which is a north-south road, which goes between Burton Green and, I suppose, Higher Kinnerton to the north. The origins of the project are linked to the discovery of this object. And Rob Jones there is, you can see in the far left-hand side of the screen, looking very pleased with himself in his military fatigues there. Rob is in the audience, I should point out. Rob was detecting in this field to the north of Cobbler's Lane one October day in the morning, I think it was, in 2019. Was finding rubbish, I think, as he said, probably as usual, Rob, until he was, I think, about to give up, as the story goes, when his detector got a signal, a large signal. He started digging down to reveal what it was, and then Rob did the right thing. He took a photograph of the object with his phone, emailed it to Susie White, who's going to talk to you again in a second. Susie emailed it to me within the museum building. I saw it and thought, I was just about to go for lunch. So when I saw it, I immediately abandoned plans to get anything to eat. Instead, we jumped in the car, along with Ian Grant, who was also with us that day. And thanks to Ian for the photographs. And we approached the field to look what was inside the hole. As you can see, it's a large white object. That's me in the middle of the screen pulling it out the ground. And you can get an indication here about the depth. I've got my wellies on, as you can see. So the hole is about perhaps 200 or 300 millimeters deep. I'm straining a bit there, as you can see. It's not just the suntan from the seasonal October weather, but the object weighs 63.2 kilos, almost a person. And it is a lead pig or ingot. I'm not going to say a huge amount about the ingot because I know Susie's going to mention it in her talk in a second. I'll just mention perhaps three things about it. It dates to the time of the Emperor Nero, so it's pre-Flavian, sort of 63 to 69 AD. It mentions a place from which the lead has come from as Magul something. Magulium, Magul. I'll see if this thing works. There we go. Magul is sort of here. And it mentions Marcus Trebellius Maximus, who was the governor of the province of Britannia. This is the area where he is mentioned, Treb Maxi, and he's the imperial legate, the provincial governor. It's the only known inscription from Britain which mentions his name. So a lot of Romanists got very, very excited when this was discovered. It's also, again, I don't want to trespass on Susie, but I can't resist saying it's quite an unusual inscription. It's very finely wrought, as you can see. It's heavily ligatured or abbreviated. So it actually gives you quite a lot of information. It's very different to the lead pigs that we already know from our area, those that are found from Halkin Mountain and so on. Those have got very simple, quite crude, in many cases, inscriptions, often mention the name of the Emperor Vespasian, and mentions quite often the local tribe, the Dekiangli. But this is very different in terms of its form. We had the chemical isotope analysed, courtesy of John Moores University in Liverpool. Here is our ingot or pig. I once got very excited with members of they're not here, museum officials from the Welsh Government about this pig. It had only just been discovered. We had it in the museum store. So I talked excitedly to them about the lead pig. And we took them up to the store to see it. Strange look of disappointment on their faces. Because obviously they were expecting to see a pig, not an ingot. But as you can see in terms of the chemical analysis, it sits very happily in the blue circle area there, which are North East Wales ingots. So I'm quite happy that this ingot has been derived from a Flintshire lead source. However, as I say, the form of the ingot is very different to the ones we already know from this area. So I would be tempted, if you pressed me, to say that possibly Magul or Magulium, whatever it's called, may be the Roman name for Minera or possibly Threath, which is on this Roman road line between Chester and Dolgellau to the southwest. But time will tell. Hopefully time will tell. We're very keen to investigate the archaeological context of this discovery. It's really, I say, amazingly important potential discovery. Because it weighs so much, it's not going to move very far. I could lift it, but I couldn't bend my arms when I lifted it. I have had to move it from time to time during my museum career in Wrexham Museum. So our guess was that it was possibly somewhere close to the line of this Roman road. And this Roman road, the line of which is supposed, but isn't archaeologically attested across this part of North East Wales. You don't see it possibly until you get to the sort of Threath area. So Chris did some magnetometry within the field. Now, magnetometry, as we've already seen, in order to be able to interpret it, you need to sort of stand back, close one eye, squint, and I think stand on one leg. And then suddenly your brain starts to form shapes and forms. So you can see very clearly in the data on the left-hand side of the screen, there's a very distinct line running up. That's a modern ceramic field drain, because the magnetometry picks up burning very well, but other things, as we've already heard, not so well. But there are, again, if you stand on one, or don't stand on one leg now, obviously, because it wouldn't be appropriate, but if you look through one eye and squint, you will see that there are vague lines running across. And when I saw the plot, I got briefly excited about the prospect of a Roman road running across the field, which would explain perfectly the archaeological context of the ingot itself. There's also, and I think this is somewhat more definite, the outline of a possible rectangular building up in the corner of the field near the ingot was found. So excitedly, I'm not sure what. No, so I should mention the interpretation on the other side, which shows this possible rectangular building and this potential linear feature running through the field, roughly on the line of where we'd expect the Roman road to be. All too good to be true, and believe it or not, it was too good to be true. So we excavated this field in September 2020, and it rained, and it rained, and it rained. And this field is heavy, very heavy clays, and of course the water had nowhere to go, and they just kept filling it with water. And here's Caroline in her wellies. But I think we were able to confirm that the features we'd seen in the geophysics were probably geological rather than archaeological. There were no Roman finds at all that I remember, nothing at all. Just variations within the geological framework of the field itself. Which takes us to the other site off Stringer's Lane. Now, sometime in the noughties, so my archaeologist at the museum, Karina Kaharski, regularly went to local detector meetings to see what they were finding. And at one particular meeting, there was a guy from Fly, who's no longer with us, I don't think, brought along, they have a find of the month, I think it's called. So they're encouraged to bring objects to the meeting to show that the members of the group. And he brought along, I think, silver denarii for the Emperor Hadrian, some nice brooches, which immediately sparked Karina's attention. She came into the office next day, to the museum next day, and told me all about it. The trouble is, this guy wouldn't tell us where he was finding it. They don't like archaeologists spoiling their fun. Don't say anything wrong. They don't like archaeologists spoiling their fun, okay? Because we tend to go in there and say, no, stop, you can't do it anymore. So it took us actually some time, some years, to find out exactly where this material was coming from. And once we knew more or less where it was coming from, then we had to find who the landowner was. And that was even more difficult. But the site itself is here. So this is Stringer's Lane. This view is looking more or less northwards towards Higher Kinnerton, I guess, which is off the slide. This is Stringer's Lane heading north. This is the field in question that we're interested in. And this wiggly line, this wiggly line here, there, I can't do this mouse, there we go. There is Pulford Brook. Now, Pulford Brook is actually quite a small streamy sort of thing. It's much more active in the winter than in the summer. But apparently it was quite an important historical boundary. It's said to be once one of the boundaries of the Kingdom of Mercia in the early medieval period. But once we found out who the owner of this land was, the farmer would tell us that this corner of the field to the southeast was very stony. And you can see when you visit the field, there's an awful lot of stones been lobbed into the hedges for when he was bringing them up through ploughing. Now, when the ingot came up, I happened to mention to Caroline, obviously I spoke to Caroline about the importance of the object. We were very, very excited, people at the British Museum and so on, very, very excited by what we discovered. But I was obviously very keen to think about the archaeological context of this find, hence the excavation at Cobbler's Lane. But I also mentioned this site, which we'd had an interest in. And I'd wandered up there it is, you're working for a local authority, you get a bit bored occasionally, pushing a pen around or a keyboard around. So I think probably a Friday afternoon, I'd wandered up, and I wandered up the brook in Mewellies, which is a very deep cut brook, and you see quite clearly in the one side of the brook, on the north side, that there was archaeology about halfway up the side of the brook where it had been eroded by the stream. And I also found part of a Romano-British quernstone and, crucially, some fragments of flue tiles, potentially from a hypercost heating system of a building, which is when we got really quite excited about what might be there. And we increased our efforts to try and find out who owned the field, whether we could get access to at least a geophysical survey of the site to see exactly what was coming up there. So, and this is again, geophysical survey of the area of that field plus some other areas. So this is the main field that we were interested in. There's the southeast corner where the farmer was complaining about it being very stony, and where this guy from Clyde was finding a lot of Roman metalwork. But there's also other things happening. Again, this is one of those things, close one eye and squint. You start to see things. But there's clearly a building in that corner, plus other features, a lot of activity along the side of the brook, plus other, believe it or not, there's an oval feature, we think, up here at the high point of the field. Luckily, this is a detail of that southwest corner of the field. And when I first saw this plot, I virtually fell off my chair. I was that amazed. I'm sure Chris feels the same as to what it was, because clearly sitting there is a corridor villa, a Roman corridor villa. So Roman corridor villas, I should say, are relatively common British form of villa, particularly in the earlier phases. They often get modified later on in their lives to much more grand structures. But in terms of corridor villas' basic form, you have a wing or an ally. There's one very well defined. There's another one not so well defined at the other end of the corridor. There's our corridor really well defined. And then a number of rooms behind the corridor. A very strange looking structure, slightly at odds in terms of alignment with the alignment of the villa. And then a lot of stuff going on down by the brook in terms of stuff that would be spotted by the magnetometer itself. So a lot of almost industrial scale burning that is going on down by the stream itself. In terms of the interpretation of the geophysics, you can see we've got this big oval enclosure possibly. This hasn't been tested archaeologically yet, so we wait and see what it might be. But certainly it's on a very high point of the field, so it would be tempting to think this might be a prehistoric enclosure. And then the building itself in the southeast corner, a system of fields and trackways around it, but also including some signs of medieval cultivation in some of the other fields. And we're still looking at possibilities of doing additional geophysics here, because it's important not just to look at the villa itself, but also to look at the landscape which it was sitting, because that tells us a lot more, I suppose, about the nature of the settlement itself. You'll see it says Bath House, question mark there. That's because it's next to the stream, it's next to a water source, and there's a lot of burning there. And a reasonable villa would always have a bathhouse, because after you've had a hard day whipping the slaves, you want to have a good old sauna at the end of the day. And that, again, is the interpretation of what the geophysics was showing us. Again, before we'd actually put the spade into the ground. There's our villa. So therefore, north is now at the right-hand side of the slide. There's our villa building with the rooms, the corridor, the rooms behind it. This strange-looking structure to the south of the villa, and then this sort of reverse F of potential walls, and then all this burning over by the stream itself. If you're wondering what a winged corridor villa sort of looks like, this shows you a reconstruction that we've done just to give you a sort of basic idea of the layout. We don't know what these rooms, these wings buildings were for. I've always had the feeling of a master bedroom, I suppose. I don't know why. I found no evidence of beds in the rooms. But it may be that the corridor itself, that this may be a dwarf wall running along the front with a view of the perhaps gardens to the front of the villa, but we don't really know. That's just to give you an idea what the thing would look like. So quite often, I think there's another slide later on of one in Kent, which is then significantly modified with the addition of a wonderfully mosaic floored dining room added to the back of the corridor. Sadly, so far at least, we haven't come across one of those, but time is on our side. It's a bit of stop press news. So this is, again, Liverpool John Moores University did some GPR surveys for us, ground proving radar. Shows more or less the same plan. But the interesting thing about radar is it gives you an idea of the depth of the walls, some of which go down actually a couple of meters in places. But the other thing, so there's the one wing, there's the other wing, there's the corridor. But can you see an apse on that side? Which is also, I don't know if I've got a slide of it, but it's also confirmed by, if you go on Bing, is it Bing Maps? Go on Bing Maps and look at this field. You can see the apse very clearly on that coverage. So we decided to do some field walking, standard archaeological practice. This was during the time of COVID. Remember that time? Now, what perfect exercise to do in COVID times, because you one person stands in a 10-meter box and walks up and down, so no chance on your outside. So what more would you like? So we divided the field into 10-meter boxes, and we spent a happy few days walking up and down, picking up anything we found. One of the things we found was a piece of painted wall plaster from the villa building itself. So that's when we put that together with the querns, the flue tiles, which I think talk about underfloor heating, painted wall plaster. The only thing we're missing is the mosaic floor. But I say, who knows, hopefully we'll find one.
Thanks, Steve. So off the back of that, we had enough evidence to apply for further funding. So with thanks to the university and to largely the Roman Society and Cadwyn Clwyd Rural Communities Fund, we were able to launch an intrusive investigation to kind of ground test or ground truth those geophysics. So there were 4 key areas that we wanted to prioritise. Part of the villa on which we thought was the side that was going to be better preserved because it showed up better in the geophysics. The weird building to the south of the villa put a long sort of evaluation trench over the industrial or reverse F-shaped feature that Steve mentioned, potential bathhouse maybe. But also have a look at one of the outbuildings that had shown up. So that's trench 4 there in the top left-hand corner. So with a team of wonderful local volunteers, Chris Matthews, myself and Steve and Susie White from the Portable Antiquities Scheme, and with permission from the landowner kindly, we were able to go and open up these trenches. On the first day, where we were machining with one of Ian's favourite massive great trowels, literally maybe 20, 30 centimetres beneath the topsoil, in I think what was probably the second bucket scoop, we hit Roman masonry. So this just shows you how shallow the archaeology is beneath the surface. No wonder the family have reported generations of large boulders being pulled up by their plough in this corner of the field. So you can see there how high the archaeology is and what looks like a really nicely preserved bit of Roman wall. Using a mix of materials, instantly we could see there was a range of stone being used, ranging from sandstone, limestone, and the conglomerate from up on sort of Caergurley way. So the villa walls themselves were fairly easy to identify where they survived, as you can see on the left-hand image there. They had, however, suffered quite a bit of battering from the plough. So on the right-hand side, the image shows the ghost outline of that winged room at the edge of the villa building, where just the lime mortar has kind of seeped through, all the stone has been removed. So no guessing why that lit up like a Christmas tree on the geophysics, the lime mortar obviously giving that really, really clear indication. We know better for next time that maybe where the geophysics shows a brilliant plot, we should maybe look at the other bit, where we might actually have some archaeology surviving. But yeah, so the walls showed up quite nice and easily. This is the great thing with nice Romano-British or Roman buildings, is that they do exactly what they say on the tin. The walls are generally where you expect to find them. They're about 2 foot wide. However, as I said, they all survived to varying degrees. So you can see here, looking eastwards across the corridor into that winged building, winged room. And then to the left of that is the range of domestic space, some of which, again, survives. You can see some of the internal walls, but other places they've been robbed out. So for here, example, this is a wall trench where there would once have been an internal room divider. Equally, at the back of the building, partial robbing of that rear wall as well. Inside the villa building itself, a real mix-mash of building rubble, effectively, to the point at which I suspect most of the floors or evidence of flooring have long gone. So the thought of maybe getting a mosaic, I suspect the other half of the building has got a higher potential, but even then it may well have already been ripped out if it was ever there. So the level of preservation is not brilliant. However, there are potentially some areas of surviving flooring. So for example, in the corner of the corridor, so that top left image, underneath the ranging rod, what looks like a very degraded opus signinum flooring, a sort of a concrete and crushed tile flooring, but only surviving in that one sort of patch. Other hints at sort of stud walling internally, still surviving on this top right image. But otherwise, it's a very, very mixed deposit, full of some Roman pottery, so some Roman Samian ware, as you can see in the middle at the bottom there. However, not as much as one might anticipate from excavating a Roman villa. Scratching our heads as to, why this might be this poor ceramic preservation, maybe. Well, no, because we've got lots of brick and tile. More likely the fact that people don't dump rubbish inside where they live. So, we tend to live in clean spaces, as Ian was saying. You maybe dump your rubbish somewhere else. So we haven't yet found their rubbish dumps. That's maybe for a future excavation. But everything telling us that we've got imported pottery from the Mediterranean and from Gaul. We've got locally made Holtwares. We've got black burnish ware from the south coast of England. Oxfordshire mortaria, so big sort of grinding vessels for mixing spices and herbs. And all the way through to the different types of brick and tile you would expect for an underfloor heating system. The remains of which are elusive, but I think they are there inside the villa under the flooring, and I'll come on to that in a little bit. We've also had some very nice coins come out from the villa, helping us date it a bit more finely. So the ceramics suggest an early 2nd century date through into the 4th century. Here is a nice copper alloy nummus of the House of Constantine, I think from the 340s AD. I won't mention where this one was found, Rob.
No.
On the spoil heap. But that definitely came out of this trench. So here gives you a nice aerial photograph. Perhaps one of the nicest finds from the villa building, the domus itself, came from just in this hole here, where there would have been an internal wall. This wall has obviously been robbed out or removed, dismantled at some point in its lifetime. And that point in its lifetime became ever clearer when one of my undergraduate students, Rob, found this very lovely, very good condition, not been in circulation long before it got put in the ground, coin of Constantine I as emperor. So I'm sure all of you are fully aware of who Constantine the Great or Constantine I was. Proclaimed emperor actually in York, so a real kind of UK connection, in AD 306. This coin was minted at the Mint of London between AD 306 and 307. Now, I chatted to a chap called Lee Toon, who is a specialist on the coins of Constantine from the Mint of London. And he was able to tell us that this is a very rare coin. There's only one or two known from the Roman Empire from the same die, some of which are in Gaul, and we've got this one here. And he suggests that it was likely minted in the latter months of AD 307, probably November. I know. How he knows this, I've got no idea. But we're looking at around 1,717 years to the day that this coin may well have been produced. But that gives us a lovely terminus post quem, or a earliest possible date for the kind of dismantling of this wall. And that, for me, tells me that the people living here are rearranging their internal space. The villa continues to be occupied after this time. So just like we might do, kitchen, diner, knock down a wall, open up the space a bit, that's what we've got here. Elsewhere, a potential flue for a hypercore system running through the villa. I'm just skipping through because I've just got wafted by Abby. With Chris there standing on the right-hand side, that's looking from what we think is the furnace through the flue into the building so this is ground sort of foundation level here, into the room, sort of pumping hot air through the villa building itself. So this is what we probably would have ended up with. Steve's already shown you a reconstruction. This is the one from Lullingston, or the earliest phases of Lullingston Roman villa, but probably more similar to what we've got here in Wrexham. I'll just hand over now to Steve to tell you about the other trenches.
Rapidly. So trench number 1 was the trench down by the brook. You'll recall that's the odd reverse F shape that was showing on the geophysics there. I've put in the centre of the slide that's some of the work we did on the field walking, distribution of pieces of opus igninum, this flooring mortar that you get on Roman sites. And you can see there's a significant increase in the distribution of these bits of flooring from the area of the potential bathhouse where trench 1 is. If you look, this is at the bottom, an early excavation photograph of the trench, and you can see the traces of this reverse F walls, with the main wall on the right-hand side heading up towards the villa site almost, and then another big wall heading across. Can't do the alignment of this. There we are there, and then a smaller wall, slightly better preserved, heading across. Under excavation, we found some intact areas of opus igninum flooring, which confirms the presence of that flooring. These areas were virtually intact. Lovely area of opus igninum flooring there. This is an internal partition wall which has been inserted later in the building's life. And I think this is the main wall. It's actually quite a big wall. It's about 400 millimetres wide, with a return which has been partially robbed out in the post-medieval times, and then returning back. And then I think returning back again over there with a partition between them, forming a very narrow corridor space at the southern edge of the building. No idea really. I mean, there's nothing at the moment that shouts out bathhouse. No sort of hypercore systems, no cold plunge baths, no any of that. But there was a lady's hairpin found near the building, which may be suggestive of its function. But I say it is very close to the brook. Looking from the other side, there's again is the return wall of the main range. Quite a narrow building, but potentially, judging by the width of the walls, quite a high building, at least possibly 2 stories. And then other building is attached to the southern end of the wall, heading towards the brook, which is off the slide on the right-hand side. And just as an indication, this is the Hadrianic bathhouse from Prestatyn, which you can still visit today. May not be a wonderful exemplar for the one if there is one at Rossett, but it does give you an idea about what the small bathhouses might look like. Trench 2, very quickly, is this odd structure here, which we always worried about because the alignment of it looked a bit weird. Under excavation, it turned out to be a square rubble spread. And as you can see, Chris had excavated this site. We've quadranted it, taken the rubble out from 2 quadrants, and you can see the shape of and the width of the outside walls. Quite a shambolic wall in many ways, internally rendered in places, and you can see quite a lot of burning. But it seems to have had a sunken floor for some reason, and some possibility of there might have been a tile floor in there at some point. And again, you can see the levels of that burning underneath the rubble itself. But the building seems to have been largely constructed of reused Roman material from the villa itself. We've had some I think 4 radiocarbon dates from the burning, and they've all come back relatively consistently towards the end of the 12th century, beginning of the 13th century. And we had some 13th century pottery from the site as well. As to what it might be, we haven't got the foggiest idea. This field is known, I think, on the tithe maps as Chapel Croft. So some suggestion it might be a medieval chapel. It's a pretty rubbish chapel if it is. And it would fill with water as soon as it rains. And as you know, it does rain occasionally in this part of the world. So it sadly remains a bit of a mystery as to what the building is. It may be that if we do more geophysics in the field and we find some graves, remember magnetometry doesn't really pick up graves too well, we find graves around the building, that might confirm the interpretation of what the building might be.
So just to wrap up, just to reassure Abby, wrapping up. So we've had some lovely artefacts, even though we weren't actually excavating their refuse deposits. As I said, lots of different types of pottery, telling us that the residents of this villa were connected into all the economic networks that you would expect them to be connected with in Roman Britain. No yet indication as to where their wealth was coming from. Is it from producing grain? Is it cattle? Is it sheep? Is it actually related to industrial activity? Plas Corch, if there is a villa there, suggests it's a mixture of agrarian as well as industrial production. And obviously Trench 2 throwing that spanner in the works about this kind of later use of the site or the field as well. The hairpin, as Steve alluded to, a lovely indicator of women on the site. So we think about agricultural buildings, slaves, and actually here we've maybe got the ladies of the household as well. So what can we say about it? It's a fairly middle status villa. It's a bit better than the one in Abermagor in West Wales, in that we've got opus signinum flooring, not beaten earth. We've not yet discovered a villa, so we're not yet in the realms of the villas of southern England, for example. Occupied between the 2nd century or early 2nd century into the late 4th century, and probably with some kind of mixed economy, likely supplying the army in and around northeast Wales and perhaps even at Chester. So overall, this find, together with the lead pig from Cobbler's Lane, really does give us an insight into extra activity or additional activity that's happening in this area that we weren't necessarily aware of. So, for example, the date of the lead pig that Susie will discuss a bit more is important. It's a Neronian lead pig. It's the earliest signs of lead extraction that we've got from northeast Wales. This is happening at a time in the 60s AD where the fortress at Chester has not yet been established. The villa itself is pointing to the fact that North East Wales, far from the view of the traditionalists of being an imperial backwater, nothing really happening, it's a military zone, this suggests that actually it's a bit more complex than that. Life here is colourful, and that's something that we really want to investigate further, together with the evidence from Croxton's Field, from Basing work, from Boras Quarry potentially. All of these sites are really adding to the picture that there's a lot more going on in Roman North East Wales and Cheshire border than has traditionally been understood. So with that, I'd like to say thank you to Heneb and all of you today, but also our funders for the project so far, and especially all our wonderful volunteers, many of whom are here in the audience today as well. So thank you very much.